I guess I'll just cut it as blunt as possible. Is this a weak group? I'll just go straight in.
Yeah, that's a good question. I like to use the term weaker because I think that folks do get a little bit caught up in how good the quarterback classes have been over the last couple of years, right? So I do think that this is a relatively weaker class, but there's going to be at least one quarterback, potentially 3 or 4 that do hit out of this class. I do feel confident saying that there will be quarterbacks who hit out of this class, but it's so difficult to evaluate the quarterback position. And so the context that I like to put it in here is right now my top 4 guys, Matt Corral, Malik Willis, Sam Howell, and Kenny Pickett, are all in a very close tier. And if you compare them to last year's class, that would have been the tier that I would have put Zach Wilson in. And Zach Wilson was kind of at a tier in that second tier of quarterbacks for me last year. And so where Zach Wilson, I thought, had a lot of upside, but also came with a lot of risk, I think that's where we find our top quarterbacks in this year's class as well.
So, Matt, you mentioned that group, and so that answers this question already kind of at least big picture. But Malik Willis, he's supposedly wild with his arm strength. He's got the dual threat ability. Looks good at the combine, continues to rise and rise. I mean, I start to get the vibe that some NFL decision makers are now thinking he could be better than Trey Lance. Now, that's within the context of Lance not winning the job immediately as a rookie. And maybe there are even some questions now about year 2. Willis also somebody who might, be a comparison to Kyler Murray, who has been a good reality quarterback, a fantastic fantasy quarterback, but maybe still is developing as a passer. Is Willis somebody who could be thrown into that conversation? And is he the clear number 1 pick right now, if the draft were to happen today? Number 1 pick out of the quarterbacks.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting, this quarterback class. And Malik Willis in particular seems to be a really, really interesting case study, right? You look at Malik Willis, and he really is, for all intents and purposes, a raw quarterback, which is a good comparison in terms of Trey Lance's rawness that when he came out. Here's the difference, though. Trey Lance did his minimum time in college, right? He had 1 year as a starter, and then he came right to the NFL, came to the NFL relatively young. Malik Willis has had a journey. He started off at Auburn, high 4-star recruit. So that's the difference. Malik Willis, I know he ended up at Liberty. This was a guy with a high recruiting pedigree out of college, ends up losing the job to Bo Nix. And for people who follow college football, I know that turns them off right away. You have to realize Bo Nix was a 5-star legacy recruit for Auburn. It was going to be hard to beat out Bo Nix for that job. Malik Willis ends up transferring to Liberty, and here's why he's still raw. Malik Willis, behind that offensive line at Liberty, with less than excellent coaching, right? Really, all they asked him to do was just use his physical tools and hope for the best. And that's what he did at Liberty for 2 years. He played a little what I call huck-a-chuck-it football. He ran around, he threw the ball deep, and guess what, guys? It worked. They won a lot of games last year, right? And the year before. So, Malik Willis did what he was asked to do, and he showed off his physical tools. Now, in the NFL, he's got to hone those mechanics, but that's coachable. You could even see at the Senior Bowl, his mechanics looked a little honed in, which I know you could say, all right, that's not a game situation. That's not really, showing anything. But what that says to me is that when he focuses on it and has the ability to get coached up, which he absolutely will at the next level, then those physical tools can end up getting honed in, and he can end up being a high ceiling quarterback. The further we go on in this NFL draft process, right to your point, Shawn, I think he will end up being the first quarterback taken off the board in the NFL draft. If you asked me a month ago, I would not have thought that. But based on what I'm hearing from the way NFL teams are reacting to him through the Senior Bowl and through the Combine, we heard that he had great interviews at the Combine. Folks feel like he has a high football IQ, which of course is really important for the quarterback position. And here's the bottom line. I know this is a little long-winded, but I want to emphasize this point. Every NFL head coach and offensive coordinator and quarterback coach thinks that they can fix the quarterback, right? And so that level of ego, when you see the tools there, I think an NFL team is going to go in on him. And you as a fantasy football player, me as a fantasy football player, my motto is to go for upside, right? It's so hard to hit on quarterbacks. If you're going to hit, you might as well hit big. And Willis has that ability to hit big.
Well, speaking of hitting big, you mentioned this a little bit in our wide receiver section when you were talking about Alec Pierce. But we have someone in Desmond Ritter who stole the show at the Combine and the drills. He impresses with his speed. He's got the big hands. someone who perhaps you would have liked more production from, early in his college career and maybe even more elite production at the end, even though obviously the team very successful in that final season. You just placed him outside of your top tier. Is he a threat to get into that first round? Is he a threat to have some NFL team reach on him, even though he's not a top tier quarterback and maybe even be the second quarterback from this group? Or are we still kind of in this section where he's clearly in the next wave?
Yeah, when it comes to draft capital, and I guess it's a little timely with all the Green Bay news, but I've established personally what I call the Jordan Love rule, which is if Jordan Love can go in the first round, any quarterback can go in the first round, right? So I won't rule it out. I don't think Desmond Ritter is a first-round quarterback, especially if, the quarterbacks get pushed back in terms of draft order. But he could go in the first round. I've seen some situations where folks like him. I think early second round is probably a little bit more realistic, really hoping my Giants do not take him. But here's the thing with Desmond Ritter. I have ridden the Desmond Ritter roller coaster because there's been times where I'm like, yeah, man, I get it. Look at this arm. Look at this rushing ability, right? Like, I get it. I'm in. And then once you consistently watch Desmond Ritter tape, there's just so many bad throws. And it's not just inaccuracy on difficult throws. It's inaccuracy on easy throws. It's the inability to hit your guys outside of the numbers. And Desmond Ritter, we just talked about Malik Willis, raw, right? Desmond Ritter has been starting for Cincinnati for 4 years. Luke Fickell has an excellent coaching staff there. I think we've seen what we're going to see out of Desmond Ritter. And one thing I like to really draw kind of line at for some folks, and because I'm somebody who, very much advocates for look at rushing ability with quarterback prospects, right? That's huge. Desmond Ritter doesn't necessarily have athleticism when he's running the ball. He has mobility. And I don't think that mobility is going to translate to the next level. He ran a good 40 time at the combine, but he doesn't run in a straight line. If you watch when he plays in college, that vision isn't there. He doesn't really have a feel for where to go when running the ball. He can execute some design runs for the Bearcats. That might be helpful in the red zone at the NFL level, but it's not going to be a real, I think, benefit for his fantasy football potential. So Desmond Ritter for me is quarterback 6. And I think it's a little bit of I've been there, I bought in, and then I've really just forced myself to back out. So there's never, I never say never to a prospect. The price can always get low enough for me to be interested, but it's going to have to get pretty low.
And I don't want to bring the tone down again, but we're going to talk about somebody who some of the external factors may not be as popular in terms of Kenny Pickett. Age, obviously, and being older being a factor, just being a 1-year wonder, and then we put in the factor of the small hands as well. So he is somebody who might fit into the prototype of a pocket passer heading into the NFL. Which weaknesses of his for you are a concern, and do you think he still makes it in as a top 15 pick? Are we still looking for that prototypical pocket passer of these prospects heading into the NFL? When we're talking about that mobility aspect.
Yeah, it's so funny. When I went into watching Kenny Pickett tape, I try as hard as I can to, come in with a neutral, blank slate. But I went into Kenny Pickett tape like, I'm not going to like this guy. You know what I mean? Like, it took him forever to break out. He's kind of boring. I liked it. I came away from my tape evaluation really impressed. There's not, I think it's difficult sometimes when a player doesn't do anything at an elite level. But Kenny Pickett doesn't have a lot of holes in his game. He does everything at a really good level, which is going to give him, I think, a decent floor in the NFL. We're looking for ceiling when it comes to quarterbacks in fantasy football, though, right? But if you look at Kenny Pickett, he's an impressive passer for me. Not a lot of quarterback prospects can hit consistently at all 3 levels of the field. Kenny Pickett is accurate at all 3 levels of the field, and he understands how to adjust his velocity and how to squeeze balls into tight windows in the short and midfield, and he understands how to lead his receivers downfield in the deep field. And so I really like that about Kenny Pickett. I think he has solid mechanics. He's got a good throwing motion. He's not the quickest release, but he has really good footwork. It's not a slow release, right? So it's a very fluid motion. Again, it's one of these situations. It's good. It's not amazing. And when you look at Kenny Pickett's mobility, what I really like about his mobility in particular, you mentioned, he's not necessarily going to chew it up on the ground, in terms of statistics, but Kenny Pickett understands how to move a pocket, and he doesn't lose accuracy when throwing on the run. And so he can throw off balance pretty well. We're not talking about Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, but he can throw, off balance. And I think that's something we've seen in today's NFL is a really helpful tool. You can kind of improvise those arm angles. And so Kenny Pickett has a little bit of versatility when it comes to that. It's so hard to read what the NFL is going to do with him. 2 months ago, before we really started to lean into these hand size concerns and before some of these other quarterbacks, started rising, I thought Kenny Pickett was a lock to be the first quarterback off the board. I was looking at Carolina at 6, Giants at 7, something along those lines. And now I'm a little bit less bullish on that. I have him projected in that 10 to 20 range still. So kind of exactly what you noted. We'll see. We'll see which NFL teams end up wanting a quarterback and who leans into this quarterback frenzy that we're in the middle of now.
Well, Matt Corral is sort of the next guy that we think about here. And he's interesting because he also seems to have such a wide range of outcomes. So it's not just that this is an interesting class because of the perceived weakness in the depth, but we really don't know. It's not just this element of, okay, they have a low ceiling. We're not really looking at it that way. They have a high ceiling, but also a really low floor. What do we need to know about him? Is he big enough? You mentioned with Ritter that the athleticism didn't actually translate into the type of rushing plays that fantasy managers might like. Does he have that element to his game? Do you like his arm strength? And is there anything to the fact that he didn't do as much at the combine and didn't really want to go and compete there?
Yeah, Matt Corral is a really interesting prospect. I think he did end up coming in at 6'1", 6'1.5", if I'm remembering correctly, which was pretty good. I wasn't sure he was going to hit 6'1". Certainly has the weight behind him. He's a really exciting player for me. I see a big arm in college, somebody who still has a lot of time to develop, and he really executed Lane Kiffin's kind of, quasi air raid type offense there at Ole Miss, right? So we got a lot of volume through the air and on the ground. He is somebody who's a little bit more physical of a runner as opposed to necessarily, an athletic runner. So if you're thinking about the way that he may run the ball, it's probably going to be a little bit more towards Josh Allen. Josh Allen is bigger, so I don't want to draw a direct comp there, but kind of in the way that Josh Allen would approach running the ball as a quarterback. Still very mobile, still effective, and still can churn yards on the ground, but he's not going to be, zipping around like Kyler Murray necessarily, right? But he does have that dual threat ability. Here's the thing that I'm trying to, kind of get across when it comes to Matt Corral. I think he has really good mechanics, and he's comfortable in the pocket. He has good footwork. He has a great throwing motion, very quick release. To go along with the arm talent, when you match that with arm talent, in his mental processing ability, Matt Corral read the field very well at Ole Miss for being, really in his first full year as a starter. I thought he executed, and it was only the second year of that offensive scheme too. I thought he executed the offense really well. And so Matt Corral, to me, projects as a game manager at the next level. And I know for a lot of folks, that's like, ooh, I'm uninterested in that. I don't like that term, right? A game manager in the NFL can be really good, right? You put him in the right offense with weapons around him, and he can absolutely distribute. So the example I've been giving is, you put Matt Corral at the helm of the Pittsburgh offense. Like, if you just got to distribute the ball to Deontay Johnson and Pat Freiermuth and dump it to Najee Harris, you're going to end up with a lot of fantasy points in the long run, right? And so some of these guys, the landing spot is going to be even more critical for than others. And I think if we can project Matt Corral into a high volume offense and one that he's going to have the opportunity to find the end zone, especially with some good playmakers around him, then he could end up being the quarterback one in this class. If you gave me, $100 to bet, right now, it would be Matt Corral to be quarterback one in the class. He's currently atop my rankings. Obviously, a lot can change though, but he's got that upside with a good level of floor to him as well.
I will ask the follow-up part of that, but I'll go into my next question as well at the same time. But you mentioned he's your top quarterback. Do you think that he is the first quarterback off the board?
I think he certainly can be. One of the things that I haven't been able to feel out quite yet, a lot of folks were saying that Matt Corral's biggest, and this actually goes back to a point too that I don't think I actually hit on from the last question, which is, what happened with Matt Corral at the combine, right? Matt Corral's biggest thing going into the combine was actually going to be his interviews with teams. There were some question marks in terms of his background. I don't want to speculate, but there were, concerns about, like getting into fights in high school. I guess he got into a fight with Wayne Gretzky's kid and, some other potential off the field kind of issues. And so a lot of those question marks were going to be when he sat down in front of NFL teams. Did they see him as a stable leader of their offense, right? He's a competitor. There is no doubt about his competitiveness. Ole Miss against Tennessee last year, Matt Corral ran the ball 30 plus times in that game, got, absolutely beat to the ground, but it was a tight game, and he ended up leading Ole Miss to the finish line there. And so, he's competitive, he's tough. I think NFL teams believe that. It's going to be a matter of, does he check out with the teams that are looking to draft quarterback, right? It's so tricky sometimes with the quarterback position. A team could love you at 9. Right now, Seattle's sitting at 9. I thought Matt Corral could have been really good with Denver before the Russell Wilson trade. Now, does Seattle want him? And have the ability to put him at the helm of their offense and develop him up a little bit? Maybe DK Metcalf will be there in a couple of months. Maybe he won't. Or if they pass on him, maybe he slides, right? Because we're hearing Pittsburgh likes Malik Willis. And so with the quarterbacks especially, it's a lot of who do we like, who fits our offense. And so it's a little bit of a cop-out answer, but he could be the first quarterback off the board. He could be the third. I'm really not sure.
And another one of the quarterbacks that's, sounds like he's going to be a bit later off the board. We'll get your thoughts on it. But Sam Howell looks to have one of the most well-rounded profiles heading into this class, but seems to be getting mocked quite rarely in the first round. So what do you think his NFL ceiling is? And do you think he is somebody who does slip out of the first round? And if he does, how late is he going to go?
Yeah, Sam Howell is so interesting, man. I mean, this was somebody who broke out as a true freshman, was absolutely fantastic. We loved him. And then he was just like solid the rest of the time, right? Like he had a good 2021, or a good 2020, I should say. Then he lost all of his playmakers in 2021. Lost his entire offensive line, lost Diami Brown, Daz Newsome, Javonte Williams, Michael Carter. And then all of a sudden, Sam Howell's mental processing, his decision-making, it totally went out the window this past year. So I think a lot of NFL teams are seeing a tale of two quarterbacks here with Sam Howell. He's got a big arm. He's physical. He can run the ball as well to a degree, kind of maybe in terms of, a guy that can get 5 or 6 rushing touchdowns a year. If you look at his mechanics, they're really solid mechanics. He's got a fluid throwing motion. He's got good footwork inside the pocket. He's relatively comfortable in the pocket at times, especially this year. He looked a little bit less comfortable in the pocket as that offensive line kind of collapsed around him. But there's a lot of good in Sam Howell's tape too. Sometimes, though, you just got to trust what you're seeing from the NFL, and we are not hearing a lot of hype from Sam Howell. So I don't know if there's concerns behind the scenes. I don't know if the mental processing might be a concern with football IQ and being able to really kind of understand what's going on. We've seen that absolutely, stop the development of NFL quarterbacks before if they really can't get a grasp and, that term of slow the football game down, right? It seemed like that game was going really fast for Sam Howell in his third year of college. That's not a good sign.
Did you enjoy that clip? Make sure you hit that subscribe button to get more content from RotoViz. And of course, you can check out full-length podcasts at rotoviz.com/podcast. Available on all podcast platforms. Check out our wide range of content. Once again, rotoviz.com/podcast.